Well, Shabbat Shalom. Oh, what a great way to start 2025. My wife and I met before there were dating apps, which is really good because I didn't have to lie about my height. I never had to lie about my weight. Fantastic. Never had to lie about my income because we were in college. I was making $50 a week teaching religious school. Fantastic. I never had to try to be put together, which is great. Because if you know me well, you know that details and I are not always on the same page. My wife is saying yes. My 9-year-old is saying yes. Just so you know what's happening over here. So I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of couples as they get ready for their wedding. Based on my observations, the most compatible couples are when details marry not details. That is a great relationship. And I'm not saying that details and details can't be together for the rest of their lives, but I can say it sounds really stressful, right? Anybody here? Right, details married to details. Yeah, there you go. Little tightly wound. Also, not details married to not details. Your kids are probably still at school, right? You need to pick them up. You're in the wrong place right now, right? That's how that goes. The best relationships on the planet are when details, which is my amazing wife, marry somebody. Well, let me just put it this way. I wasn't planning on talking about this. You guys can't see, but this podium started really nice and neat and organized. It is a mess of papers right now, right? Because the details don't always fall into place over here, which is fine because I married my amazing wife. Now, this week's Torah portion happens to be a personal favorite of mine because there is a detail that is missing, and it's a big one. Here's the detail. What happened to Joseph? Now, hold on to that for a moment. What happened to Joseph? Because I need to give you a lot of background. And really, when we get to the end of Genesis, you have to explain the last third of the book of Genesis in order for anything to make sense. So follow me for a moment. Because tonight, I'm not actually going to talk much about Joseph. I'm going to talk about his father. Anybody know his father's name? Jacob. Everybody say Jacob. Jacob is our third and final patriarch, and he is prolific. He has a lot of kids, including 12 sons. These 12 sons don't agree on anything except for that son Joseph strutting around in his Technicolor Dreamcoat. They hate that guy. And so Joseph comes strutting into their life. I'm giving you a lot of history in 30 seconds. And they look at him. They say, let's kill that guy. Seriously, let's kill this. We're going to throw him in a pit, leave him to die. And they do. Throw him in the pit, take his coat. And then they realize that there's a band of slave traders all the way off in the distance. And they figure, you know what? This Pisher can't survive slavery. No way. We're going to sell him into slavery, make a couple of shekels off of him, and the same outcome, not either way. So they sell Joseph into slavery, convince their father, who? Jacob, that Joseph has died. Jacob, the father, is bereft. Rightly so. He's bereft for decades because he believes his son Joseph is gone. Now, for those of you who've read the book of Genesis, you know that Joseph is not, in fact, gone, but he doesn't have an easy go of it. Joseph is sold as a slave. He eventually, I'll spare you the story, ends up rotting in prison for years and years, a prison in Egypt, until Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, has some dreams that don't make sense. And he has the dreams a couple of times. So he brings Joseph out of prison and says, help me interpret my dreams. And so on the day Joseph emerges from prison, he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. You know what the dreams are? They're going to be 7 years of what? No, first there's bounty. 7 years of bounty like you would not believe. 7 years of bounty, followed by 7 years of famine, right? So Joseph's advice to Pharaoh is save as much as you can because a proverbial storm is coming, and you want to be ready. And Pharaoh heeded Joseph's advice, made Joseph the second most powerful person in the world. And by extension, when you control the world's food supply, which Joseph eventually did, he becomes the most powerful person in the world. Fast forward, Joseph's brothers come to Egypt to get food. They reunite, and Joseph's brothers are surprised is the understatement of the day. But they're not nearly as surprised as Jacob, who finds out that his son Joseph, who he thought had passed away decades ago, is alive. So here's my question for you. What would you be curious about if you were Jacob finding out that Joseph was alive? I would have so many questions. And a lot of anger too, by the way. I'd pull Joseph's brothers aside. I don't know. I would ask some, I would interrogate them, right? I'd be angry. I'd be curious. I'd be wondering, what happened, right? Help me understand. Help me understand, right? This is, I'm going to my disciplinarian dad voice, right? Help me understand what happened over the past decades of my life that led to this moment. Help me understand. But our rabbis point out that Jacob doesn't ask a thing. You know Jacob's response? Jacob's response to finding out that Joseph is alive, he says, enough, enough, enough. My son Joseph is alive. I'm going to see him before I die. My son Joseph is alive. I'm going to see him before I die. And so why doesn't Jacob ask about this critical detail of how Joseph survived these past 20 years? Why does he have no questions? Why does he just leaves? He just leaves to see him. And I should say that this is a familiar story in our Jewish tradition because we often don't ask the questions we need to ask before we step forward into the places that we are going. I mean, think about how we enter into the Promised Land. For those of you who've read the book of Deuteronomy, this is many months from now. But as we're entering the Promised Land, we have no understanding of what's ahead of us. We have no understanding of even what the past 40 years have been, right? It's been basically one disaster after the next, right? We had no idea how to relate to a God that was not an idol. We struggled with that. We had no idea how to relate to Moses, and now Moses is going to be gone. We have no idea how to fight a war, and there's army after army after army as we're entering into the Promised Land. We understand nothing about where we came from, and yet, we step into the Jordan nonetheless and enter into the Promised Land. We understand so little about our past, and we step forward anyway. So there's a lot that has happened in our Jewish story, 3,500-year-old story, but you don't need to go back 3,500 years. Just go back to 2024. Right? There's a lifetime of things that happened in 2024. You could spend the rest of your days trying to understand what happened in the presidential election. Right? You could spend the rest of your days trying to understand what's going on in the Middle East. Right? You really could spend the rest of your days trying to understand Bitcoin or any. It doesn't make any sense, right? You could spend the rest of your days trying to understand, looking back at last year, what happened between you and your spouse. Spend the rest of your days trying to understand what happened between you and your dad, your mom, your kids. You can spend the rest of your years trying to understand what happened in 2024. And you might not really make much progress. There are some things that you just can't understand. There are some things that you're never going to be able to figure out of what happened before. And so I want to bring a little bit of Jacob to you. Enough. My son Joseph is alive. I'm going to go. I'm going to see him before I die. So I want to share with you, for those of you who know a little bit of my story, I was on my high school's cross-country team. Very clearly not on the cross-country team right now, but was on the high school cross-country team. And my high school's cross-country team had my high school, I should say, had the hardest cross-country course in the state of Alabama. This is true. We lived in Birmingham, but in a suburb of Birmingham called Mountain Brook. So what do you imagine is in Mountain Brook? Mountains and brooks. So we had a 5K course. Every high school had its own course. We had a 5K trail that ran around our high school, and when we would host events, this is the trail that we would run. And I remember my first day of cross-country, our coach introduced us to what was known as the hill. Now, the hill was not a hill. Remember, I lived in Mountain Brook, right? Which meant that the hill went from the brook to the mountain. Hardest course in the state of Alabama. There was a mile hill. Just went up just went up. And has anybody here run up a really big hill before? You run marathons, right? No? You're looking, okay. So anyway, if you've ever run up a really big hill, you know it is a full body, it is a schlep. What else to say? It's a schlep. And your shoulders are tired, your arms are tired, your legs are tired. Our coach said, when you're racing the hill, try not to let too many people pass you, but you are not going to win going up. You're going to win going down. What he said is the path will carry you if you let it. The path will carry you if you let it. And I'm debating if I should do this, but I'm going to do this. It's a goofy thing. He said when you get to the top of the mountain, hill, if you get to the top of the mountain, drop your arms. You're going to need it. And just pick up your feet and go. Let the path carry you. So we're running like this down the hill. You have no idea how fast you will go when you let your feet carry you where you are going all along. Enough, Jacob says. My son Joseph is alive. I must see him before I die. Sometimes you can't understand your past, at least not fully. You're never going to understand what happened to you in middle school, I promise. Right? You're never going to understand what led to the divorce. You are never going to understand fully what led you to where you are now. And maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is you know enough to move forward. And you can't spend 2025 reflecting on 2024. So I want to share with you a poem, one of my favorite poems, by the poet David White, who wrote a poem, Just Beyond Yourself. And I want to share this with you as we wrap up. Just beyond yourself. It's where you need to be. Half a step into self-forgetting, and the rest restored by what you'll meet. There's a road, always beckoning. When you see the two sides of it closing together at that far end of the horizon and deep in the foundations of your own heart at exactly the same time, that's how you know. That's how you know it's the road you have to follow. That's how you know it's where you have to go. That's how you know you have to go. That's how you know. Just beyond yourself. Just beyond yourself. It's where you need to be. So let's learn enough from last year to move forward. Let's learn enough because we've got a year ahead of us. It's enough to know that we have time ahead. And now might be the time, and this might be the year where you pick up your feet and you let your path carry you further and farther than you've ever traveled before. Shabbat shalom. Good Shabbos.